Hey everyone, welcome. I'm so glad y'all are here. This is like my fourth ever live stream. So I am like feeling, I don't know, things will probably go wrong, but that's okay. I'm happy to be here and really happy to have everyone here who's here. I've seen some people on the chat. Someone said, hey, I finally caught a live stream, which is like, good job because I haven't done very many of them. So glad you're here, Melissa, and everyone else who's here, and especially Nick Wignall. So Nick Wignall is a psychologist. He's the author of the Friendly Mind. He has a newsletter that you guys can subscribe to, and I read it all the time, and I learn from him all the time. So Nick, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So today we are going to be talking about anger. We're going to jump right in. Each of us has 3 tips about anger, and we're going to just alternate back and forth. Someone already asked, is this live stream going to be available later? Yes, it will. You can watch it later on my YouTube channel. That's where it'll be. So, you ready to jump in, Nick?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, I'm gonna go first. I'll share my first point, and we'll go from there. So, the first thing I want to say about anger is I think people in general with emotions have this idea that like all the emotions except for happiness, all the emotions are like kind of bad things that happen to you that we need to make go away, or we need to control, or we need to suppress. And I would say that's not true. Like, we are not born with inherently bad brains and bodies. Like, our bodies and brains serve a function. There's a reason why a lot of us do the things that we do. And anger serves a function, like all emotions. So there's this idea out there like, oh, you shouldn't feel angry. And I would say that is false. Anger sometimes serves a function. And not only is you shouldn't feel angry false, but it's also just not helpful. It's just not the most helpful approach to anger. So let's look at some other approaches with anger. I would say anger is deeply rooted in our brains. It's a survival reaction. It's connected to the fight, flight, freeze response. I mean, heck, it's like the first F in the fight, flight, freeze response, the fight response. It's almost like anxiety in that way, but it tends to be more outward. It tends to be more externalized than anxiety does. So what's the function of anger? I would say the function of anger in general is to motivate us, to activate us, to resolve a threat. So if I feel threatened by something physical, I might be motivated or activated to take physical action to resolve that threat. And I cannot think of very many times where I've taken physical action in a helpful way, but I can think of one time when I was in a foreign country with a small group of friends. There was like 3 or 4 of us girls. We were walking down the street, and some guy came and got in my friend's face, and I just shoved him really hard, and he left. Now, in hindsight, it's like, oh, that maybe wouldn't have been the safest thing to do, but that's what my kind of anger reaction led to action. And he like kind of, he actually like fell over. I don't quite know how this happened, and then he kind of was like kind of ashamed and walked off, and I was like, okay, I don't know if that was good or not, but that was like an anger response that I had that I would say is like somewhat functional. The other time I think anger can be functional is if we feel like we're being mistreated. So like if there's a social injustice or if something's not fair, it's common to have an anger reaction. And the thing about anger is, like the fight, flight, freeze response, it kind of turns off the thinking part of our brain. And so our immediate reactions might be to like do something really reactive, scream, yell, fight, kick, complain, whine, whatever it is. But with anger, we've got to do something else instead. So most of the time, it's just not functional. It's just not the most helpful thing to do to like immediately react to that anger. So anger serves a function. It's usually to address a threat or an injustice, but we have to be intentional about how we use that activated energy. So that's my first thought about anger.
I like it. I want to ask a question. Some people, I forget where this comes from initially. I know some people distinguish anger from frustration because theoretically the argument is that they have different functions, that the function of anger is essentially revenge. It's like someone's hurt you, so you need, in order to maintain the social balance, you need to hurt them back to sort of maintain equilibrium and teach people that they can't do bad things. Whereas the function of frustration is to energize you to overcome being thwarted in some sort of goal. You're trying to achieve something, you're getting blocked, and frustration is like energy to keep going or to figure out a different way. What do you make of that?
Mm.
I think about that a lot, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. So I'm curious what your take on that is. Or do you think frustration and anger are basically the same thing? They're just kind of different variants of the same emotion.
Yeah, I think I would describe anger as being like if we were to like divide emotions into only five emotions, which I don't necessarily do, but like the very root of it would kind of clump it all together, like frustration, irritability,
Sure.
revenge, vengeance, or other forms of anger, like well, I can't think of any right now. I would clump them all under like a master category of
Mm-hmm.
anger. And then frustration, I would say, would be an offshoot of that. But I love that thought of like, as your frustration builds, it's actually activating energy to like push you over the barriers that are stopping you from like solving a problem. Where I think the root of anger, like anger itself in the simplest form, is a pretty reactive, like
Yeah. Yeah.
brainstem
Yeah.
emotion, amygdala emotion,
Part of the way I think
Yeah,
about
that's
that is
interesting.
because if nothing, like regardless of whether that's true or not, I
Yeah.
think getting one way to practice what you're preaching, this idea of
Mhm.
kind of normalizing and validating anger, that it's okay and it's healthy, even if it's associated with a lot of negative things, is to like get curious about it instead of getting critical about it. Right? Often our
Mm.
first or our instinct, once we've done something impulsive or we felt super angry, our immediate reaction is I'm gonna criticize myself, right? Oh, I shouldn't feel this way. This is bad. This is a negative emotion. Blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
what it often it's instead of trying to just stop a bad habit, it's easier to substitute a healthier habit kind of on top of that old habit. So that's one of the things I like to do is to sort of get curious about like, oh, like what flavor of anger is this, or what could the function of this be, or yada yada yada. But I kind of like
Yeah.
switching in curiosity rather than criticism when it comes to any emotion. But anger, I found especially helpful to do that.
Oh, I like that. I like that. And if our default thought is anger is bad, then our default response is going to be suppress it, stop it, don't feel that way. And if our default response is like curiosity, I wonder what I'm feeling. How can I describe this in like the most detailed term? Is it irritability? Is it frustration? Is it resentment? What is it?
Yeah,
And that gives us more options, gives us a lot
and
more options.
and
I like that name.
interestingly, I think curiosity it tends to put us in a more compassionate mindset. Like I don't normally associate those two things, but
Mm-hmm.
judgment obviously leads to a lot of like moralizing and self-criticism. But curiosity tends to promote a mindset that's much more sort of mechanical and neutral and objective and even compassionate.
Mm.
So I think it's just a fun
Mm.
like so it would be an interesting thing for folks to kind of play around with that a little bit. Like when you get angry, try to be curious about it rather than be to get rid of it or to do something about it or even to understand it, but just be kind of curious. Like, huh,
I like that. I like that. So is that your first point, or is that just an
that's
awesome,
not. I just
brilliant
wanted to
follow up
sneak
to what
one
I
in
said?
there. I just wanted to sneak an
I
extra one
like
in
that.
there.
That's great. Well, and I like because curiosity takes us kind of out of that back of our brain into a little bit more of the
Yeah,
front of our brain.
yeah,
It
yeah,
moves us toward more intentionality.
totally.
So,
So I will go. My first one is to distinguish anger from aggression. So I think
mm,
this is true of any kind of a set of emotions. We often conflate an emotional experience, like I feel angry, with a mental or behavioral response, like I criticize someone or I punch someone or whatever. Those,
mhm,
while very related, they are completely separate things. And it really helps to manage anger in a healthy way. And by the way, to deal with other people's anger in a healthy way, I think, to get really good at distinguishing the emotion of anger or any of its variants, irritability, frustration,
mhm.
stuff like that,
Yeah,
from the activity, the behavior of aggression. Now,
yeah,
often with anger, we think about aggression and we think of like your example of like pushing the guy in a foreign country, right? And that's
yeah,
true. It can be a kind of physical behavior. But I think it's also helpful to distinguish there are other types of behaviors. You can have verbal behavior, right? So
hmm,
you're at work and someone criticizes you for some suggestion, and then you make like a snarky, sarcastic comment back. So that's a verbal behavior, right? So you can externalize your anger into a behavior verbally. But arguably, I think maybe not the most important, but the most underappreciated type of aggressive response is mental aggression, what I call mental aggression.
hmm,
And
hmm.
this tends to fall, I call it the RC3. So R in the three C's: rumination, criticizing, complaining, and catastrophizing. So these are all mental behaviors that we tend to do when we're angry. We start
Yeah.
ruminating, dwelling on something really negative, right? Something someone did to us or something like that.
Having lots of
Criticizing,
conversations with them inside of your head where you're
yes,
winning.
replaying that wonderful video over and over and over again about how someone wronged you.
Yeah.
Yep, we do that.
Hmm.
Then there's criticizing. Everyone knows what criticizing is, but just criticizing people or even ourselves. Complaining or venting, right? That's a really common one. And then, yeah, and then catastrophizing, thinking about all the ways this could go poorly. So I think it's really important. We'll talk about more about why going forward, I think, but it's key to distinguish the emotion of anger from the behavior of aggression. And for no
Yeah.
other reason, the most important reason, I think, is because it comes down to control. Anger, like any emotion, you cannot directly control. There is no anger dial on your head that you can just adjust up and down, right? You cannot do anything about your anger fundamentally, directly. You
Yeah. You
can,
can't just
though,
make yourself not feel angry. You can't just make yourself not feel angry.
right? We don't even say anything more, Emma. That's just make yourself not feel angry. That's all we need to tell people, right?
Right.
No,
So,
you can't control the emotion. You can, however difficult, you can control the behavior, the aggressive impulse that comes next, whether that's physical, whether it's verbal, or the most sneaky of all, mental. And generally, if you struggle with anger issues, getting good at what you said, validating the anger, but then not trying to control it and instead controlling the aggression, especially the mental behaviors, those
mm,
RC3, right? Rumination, criticism, complaining, and catastrophizing. Getting really
mm,
good at controlling those, your behavior in response to anger, is actually one of the best ways to get better at managing anger in a healthy way.
mm. So instead of ruminating, so let's say your boss does something to you, you're mad about it. Instead of ruminating and criticizing them or complaining to your coworker about them, what do you do instead? Is that your next point? Am I jumping too far ahead?
No, not necessarily. So my like a default would be like you were talking about initially and very briefly acknowledge and validate the anger. So
Yeah.
I feel defensive because I got criticized, or I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling pissed off, I'm frustrated, whatever it is. But that's okay. I don't like it. I know I tend to think of it as a bad thing, but really it's okay to feel that way. That takes what, 5 seconds to do that? Then what I like to do is punt or defer my thinking about the anger. So if I'm in a meeting, I might say, you know what? On my lunch break, I'm going to spend 20 minutes and I'm going to journal about what happened and how I felt and try to process it and understand it better.
Yeah.
Emotional processing is almost always better done deliberately rather than reflexively.
Yep.
So it is okay as long as you initially validate the emotion, however briefly, it's okay to temporarily suppress or ignore the emotion and then get back to it later on. That's totally healthy. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And in fact, especially with anger, you tend to get much more productive, healthy results when you do that. Instead of trying to process it in the moment, when you've got something else to do and you're emotionally kind of overwhelmed, just let it be there. Don't feel like you have to
Mhm.
do anything right now. And then get
Yeah.
back to it when you have a clearer head, you've got some space, a little bit of distance on it. I guarantee you're going to have such a more productive emotional processing session than if you try to give yourself a quick therapy session like in the moment when you're super pissed off and you're trying to talk in a meeting, and it's just not going to work. So
Yeah. Yeah.
don't be afraid to defer processing as long as you briefly acknowledge and validate it in the moment.
Okay. I like that. So you acknowledge, validate. I feel angry. I feel mistreated. I feel whatever.
Yep.
And then you say, okay, I'm not going to act on this right now. I'm going to come to this later. You write it down, you write yourself a note, and then you come back to the meeting or you come back to whatever it is mentally. Say, I'm going to address that at noon or whatever time. And then later you write about it, talk about it, work through it. And I'm actually going to
Yes.
address an emotion processing model with this. So that's
Awesome.
great. So
I will. One
cool.
caveat to that is
Yeah.
sometimes you do want to just act on the anger in the moment. Like your example with your friend. Like that could very well have been a really good decision. So I'm not saying you should
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
process or act on the anger or the frustration in the moment. But a
Hmm.
lot of the times when we think about problematic anger, it's
Hmm.
it's generally best to kind of let it be for a little while and then revisit it later.
I love that. And that does take me to my next point, which is like two things can be true at the same time. Like sometimes, like anger serves a function in general, it's pressing it or just like making it go away isn't the most effective strategy. But also, I would say the other thing that's also true is that anger is one of the lyingest emotions. It's one of like maybe not the emotions, but the thoughts associated with anger
Hmm.
are often very distorted. So we can't use emotional reasoning. We can't use anger as a very effective way to solve problems. Um, so, just like anxiety, right? So anxiety is like a smoke alarm. Your smoke alarm, your anxiety, like your fear center, is going to go off more often than is realistic. Anger is going to convince you that everyone's out to get you, that something's terrible, that people are complete jerkheads more often than is reality. So when we process our emotions, we have to recognize, like, okay, a lot of the thoughts I have around anger are often not accurate. So that's kind of my second main point, and I want to jump into two reasons why this is, well, two side things with this. The first thing I would say is a lot of times anger is a secondary emotion. So a secondary emotion is when we have an emotion in response to an emotion. So a lot of people have been taught that it's not okay to have certain feelings, and I think this is most stereotypically accurate with like young boys. Young boys are taught you shouldn't cry. It's not okay to cry. Don't be a wuss. Like, don't be scared. You're not allowed to be scared. You're not allowed to express vulnerability. And so they're constantly given these messages that like all these other things like sadness or fear or worry are all bad. You shouldn't feel them. And so then they get taught or trained socially, or sometimes we do this internally, right? Sometimes we're just really uncomfortable with these tender emotions, and so we choose an emotion to like stomp those emotions down. So a lot of times anger is a safer emotion or a more socially acceptable emotion to feel than feeling scared, vulnerable, guilty, embarrassed. And so then anger can come on as a secondary emotion. I was talking with one of my friends who um, she's a therapist who I consult with on some videos now, and she was working with this client who was angry at everyone. She was angry at her boss, angry at her husband, angry at everyone. And as they talked and talked about her life, and neither she nor I really do a lot of like, let's focus on your childhood type of work. Your childhood's important, but it's what we're doing in the moment with our childhood that is most important. Um, Long story short, this woman who was angry at everyone, when she finally like got to what was really upsetting her, it was like she was afraid of being abandoned. So her father had been really checked out. He had been really checked out her whole life. He hadn't really been there, and her mom had died when she was young, and so now like that hurt. And to protect herself from being afraid of being abandoned by her husband, she was just really angry at him all the time. And it was just safer than saying, I'm scared, I'm worried, I'm afraid you'll leave me, I'm afraid I'm not good enough. And so anger was a secondary emotion in that situation. And so in that way, sometimes anger isn't what it seems. And it's not best to just hyper focus on the anger. It's better to get a little curious and be like, well, what's this about? What's this about? Um, so the other thing I just wanted to mention when I think about anger is like, we shouldn't always believe anger. Even though it serves a function, we can allow ourselves to feel angry, but not act on it. But we shouldn't always believe it. So here's some like just really common things that people think when they're angry that aren't always true. I'm just gonna make a list of them. People say it's not fair. This is completely unfair. And usually with anger, we're going to use more overgeneralization and more black and white thinking. So we're gonna label everything as all or nothing, always or never, and that's the distortions that come from that emotional reasoning. When people are angry, they often think, "Oh, they did that on purpose to upset me. I can't stand this anymore. You made me feel this way." That's a form of externalization. So saying like the reason I feel this way is everyone outside of me. It has nothing to do with anything inside of me, like my thoughts. You might believe that the other person should know better, that they do know better, that they're doing it just to hurt you. Or you might be like, this is pointless, this is useless, this is hopeless. And again, we'll notice this like language around it that's using extremes. So when we speak in extremes, we like that's the easiest way to catch yourself, I think, in a cognitive distortion is anytime you're using extreme wording, like always, never, um, like perfect, terrible, any type of really black or white words. That's a good indication that you're probably a little bit distorted or not seeing things in a helpful way. That's my point number two. Anger lies. Anger lies a lot. Its pants are on fire.
That's one of my favorite little sayings with any kind of emotion, definitely true with anger, is while you should always listen to your emotions, you should never trust them. So your emotions are going to push you in all sorts of directions. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. It's not trying to be, it's always trying to help. So while you should always listen to your emotions, just blindly following them is rarely a good idea. I like that, to be aware of when our anger is not motivating us in a helpful direction. I think that's great. All right, so I'm going to go on to my second point, which is that it's important to accept that anger is an enjoyable emotion. Now, that probably sounds a little strange. We definitely tend to think of anger as a negative emotion, right? And not just in a moral sense. I mean, some of us tend to think of it as I'm bad, or it's bad for me to feel angry. But also I think people think like it's a bad, uncomfortable, painful emotion. And of course, I don't want to tell anyone that actually what you're thinking is not what you're thinking, and how you're feeling is not how you're feeling. But I would encourage you to really consider this. The next time you're feeling angry, ask yourself, is the anger itself, not what I'm imagining or all the things I'm telling myself or whatever, but the anger itself, is that a painful feeling? And what I think you will find, what I would consider you to, or ask you to consider is, I think anger is actually an inflating emotion. It makes us feel powerful. And now this is important. This isn't just a nice like academic curiosity. This is important because it dictates so much of the mechanics of how anger works. So Emma, you were just talking about how often our distorted thinking, things like complaining, venting, all that all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, ruminating, that's like throwing gasoline on the fire of anger. That's what keeps our anger going and makes it bigger and bigger and bigger. But well, why do we do that? I know I shouldn't ruminate. I know I shouldn't catastrophize all of it. Why do I keep doing it? Well, if you understand that anger is actually an ego boosting emotion, it makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel self-righteous, right? It's an inflating emotion. That feels good. It actually feels good to be angry, which is why we habitually tend to do things that keep it going. Like all these mental behaviors that perpetuate anger. We do it because in a lot of ways, there's some sort of insecurity, some sort of fear, some sort of sadness, whatever, that really is an uncomfortable emotion. And like a lot of uncomfortable emotions, we want to avoid them. We don't want to feel that way. So what do? Yeah. We generate these behaviors that lead to anger, which even though maybe that's not ideal, it feels way better to feel angry than it does to feel terrified or to feel sad or to feel guilty or ashamed. So we do this little switcheroo, this emotional substitution, right? Where we substitute in anger because it's actually an enjoyable, ego-inflating emotion. I had this old supervisor in grad school who used to say, if you have a patient who comes in and they feel depressed, they say they're depressed, they're probably really anxious. So scratch depression, you always find anxiety. And the reverse, scratch anxiety, you always find depression underneath. At first I thought like, what is that? That doesn't mean anything, you know? And then I got into practice and I realized actually that happens all the time. There's often depression underneath anxiety, and vice versa, anxiety underneath depression. But what's even more true in my experience is that if you scratch anger, there's almost always anxiety underneath. This switch, this emotional substitution where I feel anxious or insecure about something. Often it's something, an assertiveness issue. We know we should ask for something or say no to something, and we're terrified of doing it. We're terrified of how we're going to feel, how someone else is going to feel, whatever. And so what do? We avoid the anxiety by getting angry, by criticizing, by complaining, by venting, by catastrophizing. And that by producing all this anger, it blocks out the anxiety. So now that's important because if you have chronic anger issues, the root cause may actually have nothing to do with anger. It may be all about anxiety and figuring out healthier ways to deal with anxiety than doing all this stuff to generate a bunch of anger. So that was a lot. Sorry, kind of fire hosey, but I think that the mechanics there are really important.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you know, if you think about someone who's angry, you take someone who's like, oh, my boss is treating me so bad. And they're sitting there and they're like, oh my gosh, my boss. He's such a jerk. He's so awful. He's so terrible. I was like, that actually feels pretty good compared to being like, I wonder how I could assertively and proactively address this situation, which feels like really scary and like a lot of responsibility. Or you say, I wonder how I could take responsibility for my life and get a better education and then improve my job prospects or learn better communication skills. And it's like, that is so much work. It's so overwhelming. It feels so much better to just be like, oh my gosh, my boss is a jerk. And it feels better than
Yeah.
that. But people think it's the anger that's the problem. And it's like, well, actually, it's problem solving. It's problem solving that's the problem. Yeah. Okay, so here's my last point. So I use an emotion processing model that it's maybe too complicated. I need to find out how to simplify it. But I use the acronym O we can. So O is observe. It's like when we feel angry, here's what we can do with it to process it. And like Nick said, it's better if we do this 20 minutes later, after taking a walk, whatever it is, when we're calmer and more collected. So you sit down and you say, okay, observe. Let's watch it. Let's notice it. Let's get good at identifying your triggers. Like, oh, this is the sort of situation where I tend to get angry. Yesterday, I had to write some marketing copy. I knew that was going to make me like stressed out because I hate writing marketing copy. So you get to know your triggers ahead of time. And then you use a descriptive word. Say you describe it instead of judging it. I shouldn't feel angry. That's a judgment. Whew, I'm feeling very tense in my shoulders right now. That's much more descriptive. And then the W in O we can. W is willing. Willingness is saying I can allow myself to feel this. This is a skill I teach all over the place. I've got 20 videos on it. Instead of storming out, shouting, or shutting down, these are all reactive responses to an emotion. We make space and we sit with it. If you have a tendency to do something violent, sit on your hands, put your hands behind your back, walk away, like choose some kind of action that's going to slow yourself down. This is all about slowing yourself down. The E is explore. So we ask ourselves, am I really being honest? I'm going to check myself for distortions. You check yourself for overgeneralizations, and you explore and check for secondary emotions. You say, oh, what's underneath this? What emotion am I scared of feeling? The C is clarify. So you think, what action might be helpful in this situation? So I'll give an example. My daughter, oh my gosh, my daughter has been sucking her thumb for 9 years. We got her to stop at the beginning of the year. We got braces because her jaw is getting distorted. We paid, a couple $1,000s for braces, and she has started sucking her finger now, a different finger. And I'm like, okay, we're going to solve this. We'll figure this out. My husband is like, and he just wants to like, not like he's going to hurt her. He's not going to hurt her, but he feels very angry inside. And he wants to just like, so when he's angry, he wants to just be like, criticize, stop that, like over and over again. And instead, it's like, okay, we're going to calm ourselves down and we're going to go get a piece of paper and we're going to write down what might be helpful. How do we get her on our team? How do we communicate with her? Like what the benefits are? How do we, and so like all of that you can't do when you're really upset and frustrated. So you're going to clarify, what action do we actually want? We want her to build self-confidence and a sense of self-discipline, and we want her not to need braces again in the future because they're expensive. And so like writing out what we actually want, what our values are, we care more about our relationship with her than we do about her teeth. Like getting really clear on what we care about. This is like, you have to write this stuff down. So that's the clarity thing. And you also clarify like what actions might be helpful. So some examples not having to do with my daughter would be like, like with my boss, should I communicate more clearly? Do I need to learn assertiveness skills? Do I need to leave a situation or set a boundary here? And that's where like problem solving and action is really important. And then the last part is A, act or accept. So you need to choose your values and then choose what's the most helpful action I could take to live my values. And if you can't think of anything, sometimes that means, well, I'm going to accept that this situation is the way it is, and I'm going to put my energy toward the values that I can act on. So that's the A. And then N is now you know how, just because I had to add an N to make this acronym work. So O we can. Observe, willing, explore, clarify, act. Now you can process anger. That's like the emotion processing model in a nutshell. Wah, wah.
I love that. I love especially that your little story and being willing to be a little bit vulnerable there, Emma. Like it's so for us. I think I don't know that people think about this a lot, but I get so much imposter syndrome writing articles and talking about video, doing videos about emotional health and like. And then I get out of a video and I walk in and I get pissed off at my daughter because she's doing something at dinner or something. I get super angry and impatient and I'm
Yeah.
like, what am I doing? And then I get mad at myself because I'm teaching other
Hmm.
people how to do this and like I'm doing the same thing I'm telling people not to do. And anyway,
Hmm.
it's encouraging to hear that from you. So thank you.
Well, and it's like easy for me with my daughter to be like, okay, we're going to talk this through. But then when my husband's mad, ooh, I'm much more likely to get mad at
Mm,
him. Like I have much more like anger or resentment towards a partner or
right,
coworker than I would
right.
towards the people I work with. And it is something real that I think we all have to deal
Yeah.
with. One thing I really appreciate, Dr. Becky, she's a parenting educator. She's got 3 kids. She made a TED talk. It's like the number one most important parenting strategy. And I'm like, I'm not going to watch this. This is just going to make me feel guilty. And then I watched it and it was repair. Her answer was repair. And she told an example of when she messed up with her kids. And she's a parenting coach. Like, of course, that imposter syndrome, but it's like,
Uh,
it's okay that we mess things up. If we can make repairs and be humble and stuff, then we can solve problems.
I love that. I think that is legitimately one of the few pieces of parenting advice I've ever got that has turned out to be incredibly true and helpful, which is that don't focus so much on all the ways you screw up, but just make sure you apologize to your kids.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
I found that for so many reasons, it has been unexpectedly helpful and wonderful in so many ways to kind of build this habit of being willing to apologize to your kids, which is a surprisingly culturally like odd thing. You don't see a lot of people doing that, but it's been so helpful, including you're modeling for them how to apologize after after making a mistake. So
I hope so.
I love
I
that advice
certainly get a
actually.
lot of chances. I certainly get a lot of opportunities to model, like, okay, I messed up again, guys.
Uh,
Let's try again.
yep. All right. Can I should I sneak my third one in here and then we can
Yeah.
wrap
Give
up?
us number 3 and then we'll take some
Okay, so
questions.
I feel like we've actually been both of us have been converging on something like this. We words have been coming up like assertiveness, values, actions. What do I actually want to do? And so I think my third tip is to don't use anger as procrastination. Now we don't normally associate procrastination and anger. If anything, we associate anxiety with procrastination. But I think very often we end up getting angry and keeping ourselves angry unintentionally as a way to procrastinate on or avoid doing the thing we know we really need to do. Deep down, I know
Mm.
I need to have this difficult conversation with my boss. Deep down, I know I need to be more patient with my wife. Deep down, I know I need to set better boundaries with my in-laws. Like I kind of think a lot of times deep
Yeah.
down, we know what we need to do. Like it's not rocket
Mhm.
science, but we
Mhm.
we unintentionally, and I'm not saying we do this deliberately, but we get ourselves into this anger spiral where we get angry and then we have these habits of criticizing other people, complaining, maybe criticizing ourselves, ruminating on the past, staying stuck in the past. And I think we all do this. Emma does it, I do it, like you all do it, like we all do it. But it's important to realize that it's functional. Just like Emma started us off with this idea that anger itself is functional, this pattern of using anger and the thoughts that go around it, the aggressive thoughts around it, using that as a way to delay or avoid doing something that's really important to us, but kind of scary. And I just think
It
it's
serves,
critical
yeah.
to start to see that pattern because you can't change it until you start to see it, until it makes sense to you why it's happening. So I guess that's just my last point is to just be curious about what function this if you find yourself in patterns of anger. For me it's impatience, like that's my like flavor of anger, like I'm such an impatient person.
Yeah.
But to get curious about like why am if I keep doing this, it's because I'm getting something out of it. And 9 times out of the 10 it there's something I need to do that's uncomfortable and scary and I don't want to do it, but staying angry gives me like an excuse to avoid it. So there's a lot in there about values and assertiveness, and we don't have time to get into. But I would just, yeah, I'd really encourage people to, it's kind of counterintuitive, but thinking about anger patterns as a form of procrastination, which then signals, it hints at, if you can listen to it, it hints at your values, your goals, and what you actually want. how you can be assertive and actually move your life forward instead of staying stuck in the past or the present, in these cycles of
Mm.
anger.
I love that. So I absolutely love that. So if you keep doing something, if there's something in your life that you keep engaging in, the reason you keep engaging in it is because it serves a function for you. And with
Yes.
anger, a lot of times that function, you're calling it procrastination. I would use the word avoidance. We're
Mm-hmm.
avoiding facing the hard thing that we feel deep in our heart that we ought to do, but we're scared of it, or we don't know
Yep.
how to do it, or we don't have the skills to do it, or we don't have the resources to do it, or whatever. And so if we get down to our heart of hearts, it's like, I need to take some productive action. And that would be my bottom line would be like with anger, instead of trying to manage or suppress it, we try to use it as, like you mentioned, like a signpost, as a
Mm.
notifier. Something's not right. And we channel that activation, that energy into action towards solving a problem, actually
Yeah.
like living the life we value.
And one of the reasons I like procrastinate, thinking about it in terms of procrastination, is because I think we all have this experience of we procrastinate, but then finally we like just take one tiny step, and it's like, oh, it's actually not that hard. Like we get
Yeah.
moving on the
Yeah.
thing we need. So I like it because it taps into that mindset a little bit. Like often all the resistance and avoidance, we make it out to be much bigger than it actually is. And just doing,
Yeah.
like you said, doing that little thing of just taking the first tiny step can be incredibly both relieving and empowering, and encouraging.
Totally.
So, yeah, anyway.
Totally. I love it. I love it. Okay. Before we jump into the Q&As, Nick, where can they find you?
Yeah. So, like Emma said at the beginning, I have a free newsletter. It goes out every Monday morning. It's called The Friendly Mind. And I just share kind of practical, evidence based advice about all sorts of aspects of emotional health and well-being. Like Emma, I have a particular soft spot for anxiety. I love anxiety, insomnia, chronic worry. That's kind of my specialty. But I talk about anger and procrastination, self-doubt, stuff like that as well. So check that out, the newsletter. It's thefriendlymind.com. You can sign up, and yeah, that would be great.
Nick also has a YouTube channel. So if you only use YouTube, is it Nick Wignall? Is that the channel?
It's The Friendly Mind.
Oh, it's the Friendly Mind. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm
Did
sure
you
you'll
say
find it
that? And
under
I
my
was
name
reading a
too.
comment when you said that. Sorry, I was glancing at the comments when you said that. Sorry. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's jump into comments. We're going to answer comments for about 20 minutes.
Awesome.
I've got a few that I've starred, but if any of you have a specific question about a specific anger situation or situation where you feel angry, pop it in the comments. We'll see what the two of us have to say about it. And just as a reminder, this is not individualized advice. This is not therapy. Please don't trust anything you hear on the internet more than your own internal guidance and your personal individualized providers. And that includes experts like me and Nick, because there's lots of experts out there and they might say something that's true but not helpful for you, or they might say something that's half true and not helpful for you, or they might say something that's false and not helpful for you. So not individualized, personalized advice. It's not therapy. Let's answer some questions. Okay. Woohoo. I'm going to pop this one up. Can anger be caused by stress? This is an easy answer. Yes. The more stressed we are, the less emotional resilience we have. So it's like we generally have X number of units of emotional capacity. I don't know, 5. Let's say we have 5 units of emotional capacity every day. And if we're really stressed out and we're really busy and we didn't sleep well, we just used up 3 of ours. And so a situation that's like a 2 on the scale is going to put us over the top. We might blow up in anger. Where if we had like no stress and we still had 5 units of emotional capacity and we had a bad night's sleep, that wouldn't put us like past our threshold of emotional tolerance. So yeah, stress absolutely contributes to anger.
Yeah, well, that's so. Okay, it's interesting how you reframed it at the end, Emma. I
Mm-hmm.
would, I don't know that I would say anger causes or stress causes anger. I think stress
Mm-hmm.
definitely predisposes us or makes us vulnerable to anger because, like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying,
Yeah.
it dampens our ability to modulate and be aware of how we're thinking and what we're doing and all these things that affect our emotions. I believe pretty firmly that emotions themselves are only directly caused by our thoughts, by interpretations. However, what happens to us in the form of the stressors we experience, or even being in a stressed out state, definitely makes it harder to modulate those thoughts that do cause the emotions themselves. So I mean,
Ooh.
maybe that's too in the weeds, but I like to think about
I
stress as
like it. I like the
it's a
technical. Yeah.
predisposing factor to anger because you can be stressed out and not get angry, right? It doesn't
Yeah,
determine that you will be angry, but it
yeah,
certainly makes you more vulnerable to anger and really almost any difficult emotion, I think.
I like that. That was a more detailed response. So, let's see. Ooh, okay. This one is an interesting, detailed question. Says, or it's nuanced. It's nuanced in how, like, I've seen a lot of people responding to this, and it's too big of a question for a 2 minute internet Q&A, but we'll take a stab at it anyway. So this says, my boyfriend always blames everything on me. It triggers me and I lose control over my temper. Should I control it or should he understand it? I wonder if it means like, uh, should he should he make the changes? So um, so I'm a family therapist. The foundation of what we do is called systems theory, which is instead of saying like A causes B, I'm drawing like, oh, he blames stuff on me, which makes me angry. The way systems theory works is like A causes B causes A. This is called a feedback loop. So the things you do contribute to what he does, and the things he does contributes to what you do. And it's not about blame. It's not about who's at fault. It's about like, oh, this cycle is happening, and there's something I'm actively doing to stay in this cycle, and there's something that person's actively doing to stay in this cycle. So when I do systems work, usually, of course, I like to work with two people, and we're going to like educate both people, and we're going to work with both people on their communication skills. We're going to work with both people on their responsibility. But let's say I only have one person in the room, which is techno black currently, then we ignore whatever boyfriend does and we say, how are you going to stop this cycle? What actions are you going to take to interrupt this cycle? So we would start some little experiments to see what's going to be most helpful. And a few of the experiments I would say to stop the cycle of him blaming you and you getting angry and then you yelling at him and him blaming you. And like, I would say, okay, let's practice taking pause. Like the first thing we do is like, oh, let's pause before we respond. If he says something mean to you, say, okay, I'm going to think about that. I'm going to write that down and I'm going to consider it. And I'll come back to you in 10 minutes or tomorrow. And you like write it down and pause it. Like that's the simplest intervention. Sometimes in couples therapy, we'll be like, okay, instead of talking to each other, we're going to write it down on a piece of paper and then pass the paper across the table. And then they'll write their answer on a piece of paper and pass it across. And all this does is slow us down and give our brain a chance to like turn on and regulate ourselves more. Another thing I would say, if your boyfriend's always blaming you, is to be like, okay, if your automatic response is to return anger, let's try something else. You do one of two things. You calmly say, "Thank you for suggesting that. I don't think that's true. But I appreciate you saying that." Or you say, "Oh, I'm gonna think about how that impacts you. Like I'm gonna think, is it true?" So if your boyfriend says, "You never do the dishes," you're like, "Well, that's not true. I do the dishes sometime." And then you blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, you never do the dishes. What's underneath that? Oh, you feel like I'm not contributing to the relationship? Like, oh, am I contributing to the relationship? What are your needs? How could I meet those needs? And you start getting like just really curious. And to do that requires taking some personal accountability. And so sometimes when you're seeing this cycle of blame, you can stop the cycle by being the person who doesn't just take it all on themselves, but they're honest about how they take responsibility. They say, well, I do the dishes sometimes, but I can tell there's still a problem here. Why are you hurting? Like, what's going on? And that'll interrupt that cycle. Now, as a marriage therapist, like there's about 100 interventions we could do here. So I can't go into all those, but those are kind of my first thoughts is like, what can you do to interrupt that cycle of blame? And usually it's taking a little bit of responsibility or not taking responsibility, like clarifying, am I responsible? And to do that requires not being reactive. Okay, Nick, your thoughts? Do you want to touch this one? Or?
Yeah, well, I would just piggyback on the importance of kind of clarifying is, especially this person mentioned control. Should I control it? I'm not totally sure what they mean. I assume their temper. They want to control their temper. I do this thing called the control T chart. So a little T chart is just you draw a line within a line on top, and on the left hand side you put things I can't control, and on the right hand side you put things I can control. And in this situation, what can't you control? You can't control your boyfriend's behavior. You can't control their emotions. You can't control your emotions. What can you control? You can control how you think. You can control your attention, where you choose to put it, and you can control your behavior, what you choose to do or say. And this is, I think, before you even, like, Em and I can't tell you what you should do in this situation. I think the best we can do is set you up to have more clarity yourself about what might be the best decision. And in general, this is pretty close to a universal law. You should not try to control things you can't actually control, and you should only try to control things you can control. So getting really clear in a given situation, use your little T-chart. What are the things I want to control but can't? And what are the things I can control? And however difficult, I probably should spend more time thinking about those. So that would be my little addition to your answer, Emma.
Awesome. I like that. I like that. And I think just like the physical act of clarifying is essential. Like I can't do this work in my head.
Yeah.
I have
Do
to
it on
do it on
paper.
paper.
Always do it on
On
paper.
paper. And this is why therapists write things down because they know this. So it's like these are really complex situations. And if I said, hey, what's 10 plus 12? You could do that math problem in your head. It's 22. If I say, what's 356 plus 2,425? You're like, let me write that down. And I can tell you, I can figure out the answer. The same thing with these really complex problems. Like, write it down. Like, if that's the only skill you have with emotions, it's better than nothing. Okay. Ooh, here's a good one. Okay, here's a good one. How do I address anger feelings? Because I'm inundated with work and constantly evaluated at work. If projects don't work out because I'm doing too much, when bringing it up to my managers, they do nothing. So this is a pretty common problem. People feel stressed, overwhelmed, and frustrated. Do you want to take a stab at this one first, Nick?
Yeah,
Do you want
sure.
me to go first? Okay, go.
No, I'll take you off the hot seat. You had to go first. The other two. The second person always gets time to reflect and respond to the other person's. So the first thing that comes to my mind, I'll just go off the cuff here, is oftentimes in emotionally difficult situations, especially this kind of chronic anger or frustration at work, I like to kind of simplify. And in my mind, with a situation like this, you basically have two options. You can accept or you can assert. You can be accepting or you can be assertive. You really don't have, now, those are the two what I would call healthy options. You could also just
Mm-hmm.
continue to stew and ruminate and vent and criticize
Be
and,
resentful.
be resentful,
Make
right? You
yourself
could do that.
make yourself the poor victim and justify how bad they are. Yeah, that
Yeah.
feels good too.
And
But
however,
not helpful in the long run.
well, yeah. And however true that may be, probably not helpful. That's a really important distinction. A lot of our thoughts,
Yeah.
even if they don't have many cognitive distortions in them, just because a thought is true doesn't mean it's helpful. So it may be
Right.
true that your manager is being really unfair, right? But reminding yourself of it 400 times a day is not helpful to anybody. So I think in any given situation, a really good heuristic, and again, this is like a first step. There's a lot more that could go into this, but my first step recommendation would be, is this something that I can and am willing to be assertive about? I'm going to schedule a meeting with my manager. I'm going to say, this is really, I'm having a really hard time with this. It's really getting in the way of my productivity, our team's productivity, and I really think we should do X, Y, and Z, right? However hard that is, right? Maybe you want to do that. But if you are unwilling or unable to be assertive, basically it comes down to acceptance. Like this is the job I'm in. It's really frustrating. I wish this wasn't the case, but you know what? It's a job and I get a paycheck and I don't have a lot of other prospects. So for now, I'm going to try my best to accept that this is a very frustrating situation and not expect that it be anything else. And it will continue to be frustrating, but at least you won't be frustrated about being frustrated or resentful about being frustrated. You take that second layer off. You stop compounding the emotion. So I think that it's it's either about assertiveness and action, or it's about acceptance and expectations and getting really clear and sort of modifying those. So that's my first take on that, Emma. What do you think?
I would agree. I would agree. It's very much um, like to solve this problem requires clarity and assertiveness. So the first thing says, I'm inundated with work, and basically what's going on is there's a uncertainty, there's a lack of clarity between what your boss thinks you can do and how much you can do. And maybe, let's say there's 10 items that your boss wants you to do, And on average, you're capable of doing 5 of those items. And so there's that gap there. And it's like, if you're sure, if you're 100% sure that you're not capable of doing more than that work, then you can actually be calm and confident about that. Well, thank you for giving me so many options at work, boss. I know how many hours I have and I can do 5 of these. Pick your top 5. Thank you. And that's like an assertiveness task. But if you're like, well, maybe I can do 7, maybe I can do 7. Should I do 7? I don't know. And then maybe he's going to give me more and I don't know. And he doesn't know how much I can do. And I don't know how much I can do, but I'm going to keep trying and I'm going to feel stressed about this all the time. Then that lack of clarity leads to stress and then feelings of resentment. So, I mean, when we are really clear on what we can and will do, then we don't need anger to protect ourselves from feelings of like disappointment or unfairness. And so that would be what I would say is like this is a clarity problem solving exercise. Can you create clarity with yourself on what you're capable of and what you have control over and what you don't have control over? I can't change my boss, but I can change all these different things. I can change what I focus on. I can change what I think about. I can change how clear I am, how assertive I am, how I communicate, how many projects I finish, what skills I develop. Like, oh, maybe I could finish 6 tasks a week if I learn how to use Excel better. So I'll put that in my locus of control. I can change that and I'll put that. So I consider this a clarity exercise, not an anger exercise. Okay, this is fun. I like these questions. You guys are asking good questions.
These are good questions.
I have 2 questions that are kind of similar, so I'll bring them up at once. The first one says, are there any techniques to notice the beginning anger situations before the emotion kicks in? So this is kind of a preventative question. And then the other question is, what are some good exercises for reducing rage when you're immediately experiencing it? And it's true, both Nick and I are very like up in our heads and we like write articles in our offices in quiet places about anger. And it's like, the reality is when you're angry, it's hard to stop or think clearly. So these are good, helpful questions about like, in the moment though, Emma, what do I do? So going back to this one, are there any techniques to notice the beginning anger situations before the emotions kick in? The first technique I would say is write a list of your triggers. Write a list of the situations and times of day, times of month, times of year that are going to be more likely to be angerifying for you. So notice that ahead of time and write about it so you can identify these situations ahead of time. For me, it's like bedtime, bath time. Both of those should not be angry times, but that's when I'm like most likely to lose it because I'm tired.
Emma, this is
yeah.
such a good, sorry, I'm gonna interrupt because this is such a good tip. And
Please.
I have a version of this that I literally, this is something I do with myself. Not frustration, impatience specifically is like, I talked about that. It's my big thing I'm working on that I struggle with. But I have done that exercise. I call it like a trigger inventory. So I think about what are all the situations throughout my day and my life where I tend to get really impatient. And then what are the triggers? And so like the first one would be me, like when I walk out of my home office and into the house and like my kids are all there and they're excited to see me and it's awesome. And it should be a really awesome, fun time, but I actually end up getting frustrated and impatient. Like maybe I want to talk with my wife. I don't necessarily want to, play checkers for the 400th time. So and there's a bunch of those, right? But what I have done to elaborate on your point is, and this is going to sound stupid, but it's actually been pretty helpful. I know those times and I've created calendar events that go off with reminders 5 minutes before the thing happens. So I tend to leave work at 4 p.m. So I kid you not, at 3:55, I have a calendar event that goes off within a reminder that says, be patient. That's all it is. It's just some little, and it keeps me mindful of, okay, I know instead of just walking into this thing blind and getting blindsided by my impatience or whatever, I anticipate the trigger and the potential emotion. And, surprise is like an emotional amplifier. Surprise plus any emotion equals way more emotion.
That's true.
So if you can get rid of the surprise factor, any of these anger variants are much more manageable when you don't have the surprise factor. So this thing of, yes, inventory your triggers and anticipate them proactively. And then even like put sticky notes around places, set reminders on your phone, do whatever it takes to keep some presence of mind about, because we're all super busy. We got a million things going on. And in some ways, it's just a memory problem. Like we just lose track of this stuff and then we get hit by
Yeah.
it, we get blindsided. And of course, we have a hard time after that. So sorry to interrupt you, but I
No,
wanted
that's
to
great. I love it.
piggyback.
That's a perfect example of a technique. Um, yeah, and the other thing I would say is like have a go-to strategy. Like put a list, put it on your phone, put it somewhere that's like when I start to feel angry, here's what I do, and it's a reminder because
Mm,
in the moment you're not going to be thinking clearly. Um, so it would be like take a walk, take a drink of water, go someplace quiet, or go to your happy place in your head. Like let's say you can't leave work, right? It's like okay, let's like make a phrase that's not too negative that I'm going to say in my head, like, okay, sometimes people are wrong. Not everyone's going to like me. Something like that. It's okay if not everyone likes me. Maybe that's your phrase. And you have like these go to phrases and you put them on your phone, you put them somewhere you remember so that you see them all the time. And then when you're upset, you have a very quick go to for that. Um, and I gave some examples for this other one. What are some good exercises for reducing rage when you're immediately experiencing it? Um, I think that question initially is like, how do I make my rage go down? And I would say, how can I make that rage go forward? Not forward in a reactive way, but I mean in a channeled, intentional problem solving way. And my number one go to is writing it down. So I'm angry about this situation with my daughter. I'm angry about this situation with my husband. I'm angry about the situation with my employee. I'm going to go write it down because that's how I problem solve instead of just making the feeling go away. I think it's important to stop ourselves before acting violently. So I know people who train parents who are violent say like sit on your hands, put your hands in your pocket. I also like think it's helpful to just say close your mouth, just close your mouth, just don't say anything right now. Anything you can do to pause, delay, like put it off, and then I say write it down, but it's also like for some people it's really helpful to do something very physical because that like physical activation is so high that you've got to like drain that a little bit before you can write. So like a walk is the most easily accessible thing. I wish we all had like wood to chop because that also makes me feel better. Any thoughts on this? Do you have any other tips?
I want to see a video from you, Emma, involving chopping wood somehow. In the next month or two, I want to see a video that involves you chopping wood.
Have you seen like the like I don't know how to describe this other than like wood cutting porn, but it's not porn, but it's like this guy wearing suspenders and he's got big arms and he's like, it's like,
I've never seen it, but I'm here for it. Like right now, show me some. I'm
yeah,
into it.
let's go.
Okay, so I'm glad you answered this question first because I tend to have a very obnoxious answer to this question. And actually, I liked your answers. I tend to not like most answers to this question, but yours were pretty good. Writing, okay, real quick on the writing anything, writing about your worries, writing about anger. I think one of the reasons this works so well as a way to process difficult emotions, especially in the moment, is because you can't write nearly as fast as you can think. In the span that it
Yeah.
takes to write one sentence, you could think like 15 sentences in your head. You think so much faster.
Oh yeah.
And every kind of anger thought is gonna generate more emotion. So if you're already pissed off and angry, in the span of 10 seconds, you could have 10 more anger fueling thoughts. But in 10 seconds, you might be only halfway through one thought writing. So constraining the speed of thinking to the speed of writing is, I think, the mechanism by which that technique is so helpful in so many situations. So anyway, just to go on that. That being said, my obnoxious answer to this question is I refuse to give techniques for managing it in the moment because, of course, if there are like situations where things are really violent or getting really out of control, you want to deal with that. But in general, prevention is definitely the best mechanism. You need
Yeah.
to get better at addressing your anger before it gets to the point where it's at rage or extreme anger. And if you're constantly looking for ways to deal with that anger when it's a 9 out of 10, I'm not saying everybody does this, but it can be a way of procrastinating on getting better at the more difficult skill of acknowledging and dealing with the anger when it's small. And that's something most of us are not very good at because we don't like getting big emotions generally, whether it's anger, whether it's anxiety, whether it's shame, whatever it is. So our tendency is to avoid. right? And so there's some little bit of it when it first starts off. I use the metaphor, it's like a snowball. So if you take a snowball in your bare hands and you hold a snowball, it's kind of uncomfortable, it's cold, but you can
Yeah.
do it, right? But a snowball, if you drop a snowball at the top of a mountain, it could turn into an avalanche. And by the time it gets to the bottom of the mountain, you can't do anything about an avalanche. Like you can have all the techniques in the world. Basically, you got to put your head down and hope you don't get crushed. So you
Mhm.
want to deal with the snowball version of your anger, not the avalanche version of it. But doing that requires this skill of quickly acknowledging and validating your emotions. And if you struggle with intense bursts of anger, to me, that is often symptomatic of you are not yet very good at acknowledging and validating that anger in its baby stages. And so I think that's the skill, is to try to practice, and don't practice it in situations don't practice in situations where you're getting crazy angry. Look for small areas in your life where you get a little bit frustrated or a little bit mad, a little bit irritable. Those are the situations where you want to practice and develop this skill of quickly acknowledging and validating the anger. Get good at it there, and then once you get good, work your way up to more extreme, to using it in more extreme versions of anger. But get at it early and prevent it from spiraling. That ultimately is I think the high level skill that we want to build. So that, again, that's my obnoxious answer to that non-answer to that question.
Yeah, well, I like it. I like it because and really, if you think about it, like if we're practicing regular self-care and regular problem solving, and if we're resolving problems in our relationships as they come up, and if we're communicating, we don't generally have these issues that just build and build to an explosive point over and
Yeah,
over again. Um, so like, sleep, rest, nutrition, general brain health, exercise, like
assertiveness,
things like that can also contribute to
confronting
our
the
emotional
difficult
health.
things we know we need to confront before they
Absolutely.
kind of, yeah, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I don't want to take too much more of your time. Let's let's see if I can find one more good question.
I'm game. I'm game to keep going, Emma.
Okay. It's fun, isn't it?
It is.
I like it. Here's a great question, and I don't have a great answer for it immediately. Let's see if you do.
Okay.
How how would you define it? How can healthy anger be defined? What would you define as healthy anger?
Ooh, I know. I think all anger is healthy. I don't. There is no emotion that is unhealthy. There's no emotion that is good or
The,
bad.
the feeling itself.
Emotions, emotions are like your hair color. It does not, whether you have red hair or black hair or blonde hair. It doesn't matter. They're all fine. Something can't be unhealthy if it's not under your direct control. We only say things are sort of, it's only a problem if it's something you can actually do something about when it comes to emotional health. So when
Mm-hmm.
people talk about unhealthy anger, to me, that's all the stuff around the emotion that is unhelpful. So continuing to ruminate or elaborate on how someone hurt you, and even if it's true, it's not getting you anywhere. It's not moving anywhere, right? Or, criticizing someone else in your head, which generates more and more and more anger, even to the point where even to the point where if you're in a rage, the rage is not bad or unhealthy. How you respond, how you behave might be unhealthy and bad, either physically, verbally, mentally, whatever. But the emotion itself, all emotions are healthy. I think that's real. I don't want to be like glib or overly philosophical here with it, but this is a profoundly important. All of emotional health depends on this foundational idea that emotions are not good or bad. It's how you respond to them. It's how we act, including our mental actions, that can be problematic, unhealthy, healthy, not healthy. So I tend to think of the unhealthy part of anger, broadly speaking, is on the behaviors around anger, including your mental behaviors, like those ones I talked about: rumination, criticism, catastrophizing, and complaining. Those are the big ones. So
Yeah.
if you think there's unhealthy anger going on, it's all that stuff, right? That's unhealthy. And so that's what I would focus on.
That's interesting. I think I would like agree with that theoretically, and then I think about if I was talking to someone who was like just drowning in anger and they are just so mad all the time, I would agree that it's like never helpful to be like I shouldn't feel this way. Like it's just not helpful. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's not helpful. It doesn't work. Um, And if someone is like drowning, seething in anger all the time, they're just mad all the time. I mean, we're talking Fox News, but more. Like they're just mad. Sorry, I can't. But like there's other news channels that are liberal that are angry all the time too.
Sure, sure.
Um, I would say like the root of our emotions, the core feelings we have, I would agree. Like there's nothing wrong with them, but we feed anger in an unhealthy way when we use it to justify ourselves. And justifying looks like anytime we're exaggerating or distorting the world or shifting our focus to just focus on what we hate about someone or something or some situation, we're focusing on that because it fuels our sense of self-righteousness and or hopelessness. It's all vindicating. It's all
Yes.
self-righteous and vindicating. Anytime you're feeling really vindicated, justified, self-righteous, victimized, and poor me, or like angry me, like and you're using that in a way that's completely interfering with you living the life that you care about living, which is probably more like calm, intentional, purposeful, then that's going to be unhealthy. So it's like my question is, does it help you live the life you want to live or not? And if it's not helping
Nice.
you live the life you want to live, it's not helpful. Martin Luther King recognized that like black people who were being discriminated against had a right to be angry, but he also said it's not helpful. It doesn't help our cause. We need to choose to channel our efforts into intentional, purposeful action to create the change, to create the justice that people deserve, instead of um, using our anger to fuel that. And I think that's an example of someone who took a situation where, yeah, you might be right to be angry, um, and chose to channel it into the life he valued.
Yeah, I mean that's really nice. It almost I'm imagining this diagram in my head of no matter what the anger is, I think the
Mm-hmm.
emotional healthy way to deal with it is always acknowledge and validate the anger and then channel the
Mm-hmm.
aggression into assertiveness. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, whether that's physical, verbal, mental aggression, like yelling at people, being violent, complaining in your head about that's all aggression and it's all unhelpful, including because it's just going to perpetuate this anger, which is not bad, but it's also not great to be walking around feeling constantly angry. Ask yourself, what can I do assertively in a healthy and productive way? How can I use that energy assertively in a way that aligns with my values? So shifting or
Mm-hmm.
transferring from aggressive behavior to assertive behavior. And also generally just I think it's a principle of emotional health. I think we spend way too much time focused on our emotions and not nearly enough time focused on our behavior.
Yeah.
Acknowledge your emotions, validate them, listen to them, schedule a little time to process them. But the vast majority of your energy should be spent on your behaviors, including your mental behaviors, and working on those and developing good habits in your behavioral repertoire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for example, with anxiety, people might be like focused on their anxiety. Is my anxiety going up or down? Is my anxiety going up or down? And even if they're doing like exposure therapy for agoraphobia and they're like going outside and they're doing things that stretch them, they're like, am I more anxious or not anxious? Did I have a panic attack or not? How do I know if I'm doing good? Because they're basically hyper focused on
Right.
their anxiety. Where instead, if we shift that focus to like, I can feel really anxious, I'm going to focus on, did I go to my granddaughter's play or not? Yes or no? Okay, if it's a yes, you're living the life you care about. Same with anger. Right? It's like, oh, am I angry or not angry? Should I be angry? Why am I angry? What should I do about being angry? And it's like, okay, well, hey, you feel angry. Now, what kind of life do you want to live? How do you want to be acting? Put more energy into that.
Bingo.
Yeah. Okay, I think I have one more question I want to answer. And if you see anything in the comments you want to answer, feel free. But this person says, one problem that I have is that I'm unable to express my anger. Like I feel like it, like I feel it, but I don't really do anything about it. Is it healthy to not process anger? And I think there's some like bad pop psychology out there that says if you feel angry, you should punch a pillow. You should go to those break rooms and break stuff. Like you have to express that anger. You have to vent that anger for it to go away. And that's wrong. It's just like the like it's not good
It's not
it's
true.
not good information. So when we feel really angry, and then we act really angry, and then we feel a little bit of relief afterwards, that kind of reinforces that pattern of our brain believing that the only way to manage anger is to like express it, vent it, break something. So I would just say, like, let's steer away from the far side of this spectrum, which is like, you must express your anger or else. That's not true. On the other hand, if we have a lot of activated energy inside of us and we take no movement with that, that activated energy, I think, somatically in our bodies can be harmful. So whether that's fear or anger or excitement, and you do nothing with it, it kind of stagnates and hurts our bodies. And there are diseases associated with anger, like high blood pressure, like muscle tension and muscle pain. And I think when we don't process and resolve our anger, we can experience some pretty negative side effects. And a lot of times it ends up squirting out when we don't want it to. So the short answer is, you don't need to vent your anger, but I would say use your anger as a warning sign, like, oh, something might need to change. I need to either act on something or accept something.
Yeah, and I would jump in there and clarify. I don't know. So anger is often associated with a lot of illnesses and diseases. I've never seen any evidence that anger itself, the emotion, causes any physical problems. I think it's to my knowledge, it's the stress associated with anger that leads to most of the physical problems. So I just think that's important. I'm not trying to make a mountain out of molehill here, but like, it's important that feeling the emotion of anger is not a problem. But if
I'm so glad you clarified that. I'm so glad you clarified that. Same thing with like anxiety and stress. Short-term stress, our bodies are very good at handling, but chronically, like carrying it. And you're right, it is this stress, and stress is the physiological response to like activation. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yes.
So, but you brought up, like, processing is such a weird word. It's one of these like umbrella terms that therapists use all the time, and like, I don't think anyone really knows what the hell they're talking about. Like, it means so many things to so many people.
Sure.
One of my, and I think Emma, years ago we did a whole episode, like a podcast episode on emotional processing. So I don't think it's wrong. Like, I think there are ways to deal with and think about and respond to your difficult emotions, including your anger, in a healthy way. But how about this? Process your values instead of your emotions. Like, we get so fixated on the feelings, the emotions themselves, and they're not good, they're not bad, they're just things, they're just emotions, right? Notice them, validate them, be willing to have them, but then get on with your life. Spend much more time and energy thinking, yes, you're angry, right? Maybe you haven't processed it as much as you think you should, or other people think you should, or whatever. What do you want to do? Is anger actually getting in the way of something? Okay, well, that's interesting. Like, what are you trying to get to, and why is anger an obstacle to that, right? Or is anger causing you to avoid other things? But like, it should always be, dealing with your emotions should always be in the context of the bigger goals and values of your life. To get myopic about emotions is just a recipe for long-term emotional suffering, in my opinion. You can't process an emotion without the bigger context of clarifying and processing what you actually want in life. And so many emotional problems, they basically dissolve when you get radical clarity about what you really want. Because once you really know what you want, it's so much easier to be assertive and start moving towards those things. And when you're doing that, so much of this stuff melts away. Now, it's hard. This is not easy, right? It's difficult. But you can't do it if you're obsessed with the emotions themselves at the expense of the often difficult work of thinking really hard about, what do I actually want, and what would it take to start moving in that direction? Sorry, that's another obnoxious non-answer. But it is what it is.
I like it. And this person says, like, I'm having a hard time expressing my anger. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Are you afraid to write on paper, like, I feel angry? Because that's the first step you just mentioned, Nick, validating, right? So is the problem here, like, that you're on this person, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Ragi Kumar? Is the problem that you're unwilling to say, like, to write it down, or you're unwilling to say out loud to someone, I feel angry right now? By the way, that's a really powerful skill. Like, in a conversation, a lot of people might say, like, you're so stupid, or this is so awful, or everything's terrible, but they aren't able to say, I feel angry right now. Like, is that the problem you're having with expressing your anger? Or is the second problem that you mentioned here, but I don't really do anything about it. So the actual problem is getting yourself to do stuff that you don't want to do. And that's kind of a question for a different
I,
Q&A.
th-
I'm actually
I,
hoping to
uh,
get a guest on for that question.
I think a lot of times processing what we really want, being super honest about what we actually want, is way more terrifying than processing our anger or our sadness or some other. I think our values are often way more terrifying because if we really were clear and honest about what we really wanted, what that would require, it might require a dramatically different orientation to our whole life if we were honest with ourselves about what we really wanted. So it's possible, and I'm talking straight to Ragi here, it's very possible that the resistance to processing or expressing your anger actually has more to do with processing and expressing what you really want. And so perhaps thinking about it from that angle might be a more helpful way of looking at it. So I would encourage you to think about that. Maybe just let your anger be for a little while and instead think about the flip side of that anger might be what do I actually want that I'm not able to get right now? And see what happens, tackling it from that angle.
Mm, that's so good. And it's true. It's true. It's so much more uncomfortable. You're like, what I'd like is what I want is. It's so much more vulnerable. It's
Yes.
scarier than being
Yes.
angry. That's for sure. So I love it. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Nick. Really, really appreciate you being here. Love your
Of
expertise.
course.
Fun to go
Thank
back
you,
and forth
Emma.
on
And
you.
thanks to
Okay.
everyone for showing up and asking such really good questions. Like I'm impressed.
Mhm.
Good, thoughtful questions.
They are good questions. I've got one last comment that I have to share. Surya says, "Why did the bicycle get angry? Because it was too tired of being ridden." Good one for the end of the live stream. So, guys, thank you all so much for being here. And if you want me to do more live streams, let me know. Comment below. I'm trying to do a couple this summer. Um, and also, yeah, check out Nick's stuff for sure. Go subscribe to his channel. He's got great stuff. So, okay. Thank you, everyone, and take care. Bye, Nick.
Bye.